Welcome back, everybody. Very cool day today. We said at the end of last year we want to talk more with people who are really on the front lines of disclosure. And I don't mean government and the narratives coming down from the media. I'm talking scientists, engineers, people who are doing studies that are maybe outside the box to try to kind of shed light on things. And a big thing that's come out lately is the term CE-6. Have you heard this before, Jason?
Do you know what? I'm not familiar with it as much as I am with the CE-5, so maybe give
So,
us a
and
quick
again, it may
rundown.
not be verbiage that our guest likes to use, but
Yeah,
essentially it's human initiated contact. So whereas a CE-5, you would go someplace, meditate, have an intention, and hope that something manifests, there's a way to physically broadcast radio signals, and it's called moon bounce technology. How cool is that? They're going to bounce the frequency off the moon so it scatters, and you're covering a much bigger section. So when I heard about this, I was blown away. Does this actually work? And we're going to speak to the man who's doing the work. I mean, he's got a more powerful radio station in his backyard than the biggest radio station in Los Angeles has.
that's nuts.
So he's either crazy or brilliant, and we're going to find out in just a few minutes.
It's
So
a fine line. It's a fine line between the two, isn't it?
Einstein, crazy, Tesla, crazy. Yeah, we're all kind of half crazy, and that's what makes us different. So I'm excited today. We're going to be right back with Mr. Jimmy Blanchette right after this on UAP Studies Podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of UAP Studies Podcast. My name is Louis Borges. Joining me, as always, my good buddy, Monsieur Jason Guillemette.
Hey, it is known as Louis Gorgeous Borges. All right,
thank
that
you,
is
buddy.
your official title now.
I got to adapt a French accent today because I am definitely out-Frenched. We have two very scholarly French Canadians in the house. I think Jimmy now lives in the States, but we're gonna forget that he's a Canadian. We're proud to have him. So today's a good opportunity to talk about something not a lot of people know, which is CE-6. We're all familiar with close encounters of the first kind, second kind, third kind. We know of Stephen Greer's CE-5, but I thought this was an amazing new way of trying to initiate contact. In fact, they refer to it as human initiated contact. And we want to get to know the gentleman who is kind of pioneering all of this. He's written many scientific papers. He's a chemist by trade. I've seen him do some mathematical breakdowns that make your head spin. So we have a big mind in the house today, and we want to get to know about CE-6. So very warm welcome to the show, Mr. Jimmy Blanchette.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Jason. Hi, everyone. So glad to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. Now, we want to know a little bit about yourself. So tell us a little bit about sort of your studies and your training and how that led into interest in UAP, and then taking a proactive stance on, I'm going to make contact with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get started, I just want to precise, you mentioned CE-6. There are some folks in the field that have been using that language. I'm not really using that language. I'm calling it just purely human-initiated contact, right? Which is accessible to everyone, and we'll talk about it throughout the presentation. But yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a scientist by trade. I'm a chemist. Had the opportunity to write a few scientific papers. Have a good background in electronic and engineering. I'm building. One of my passion is to build very large antenna arrays, which I've been doing for years now. And more recently, I got into a contact modality, or called a communication modality called moon bounce communication, or EME, which stands for Earth Moon Earth, communication. So that's how I got started. Really, that's what got me into this, deeply into this field. And this has been an amazing journey. So I'd be happy to give you, a good idea of how we can do this. And people have been doing this all over the world as well. So I'd be happy to give you a debrief on that.
So as an amateur radio enthusiast, what got you into the world of UFOs? Was it just the fact that it's out there, or did you have something happen communication-wise that made you kind of get inspired?
Yeah, good question. Well, I've always been into the universe since my childhood. I was always, at early age, I was reading quantum physics books and astronomy and all this kind of stuff. So I was very much into the universe. I had some mystical experience myself, since my childhood, like out-of-body experience and things like that. So I knew there was, something out there that, was in the unknown, if you will. You know, fast forward to a few years ago, 2013, I got interested, as I mentioned, in the contact modality called moon-bound communication. I'm a licensed amateur radio operator since childhood as well. And I got interested in this contact modality. I started building antenna systems to be able to do this crazy modality. And what it is, just to summarize briefly, is to really essentially just use the moon as a passive reflector. So essentially, you beam directional antenna towards the moon, and you broadcast very powerful beams of radio waves, and the radio wave will kind of scatter or bounce back right towards the earth, if you will. It's going to bounce in every direction, but a fraction of that signal will come back towards the earth. And essentially it's using the moon as a reflector, like a mirror, if you will. It's a very poor reflector in a sense, and it's also so far, you know, the round trip, it's like 500,000 miles. So the signal coming back from the moon is so weak that typically you cannot even hear it with the human ear. But nowadays, with with computers and technology, digital communication, the computer are still able to pick up the signal in the background and decode, what the other station is communicating. So it's a very fascinating contact modality, very challenging technologically, to achieve. And I was attracted by this challenge. I said, when I heard about it for the first time in the 2012-2013 timeframe, I said, there's no way in the world I'm not going to try this. This is so cool. I need to try this. So that's what got me into this, building this antenna system, this powerful space communication system. If we fast forward to 2017, I had heard about this, people doing called CE-5 or, human initiated contact. I was very intrigued by it. I had seen some videos on the internet, and I was, amazed by what I was seeing. And so I decided, I said, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try this. This is too cool. And so I decided to get ready for it. And I was trying actually to find a site where I will be doing this work, a contact site. I was living in California at the time, and I had located with Google Earth a place which I knew a little bit, close to a lake in Rose Valley, California, or Los Padres National Park. And that seemed to be a perfect place, far remote from the city and everything. So no signal, no interference, nothing, no light pollution. So I decided to go there on an evening alone, and I was just literally just screening the site, for future contact work. At the time, I had the intention to put a little group together, and we do, typically people who do this work do it in a team, in a group type setting type of thing. So, but anyway, but before going there, I had set the May 1st as being the day, the weekend I was going to go to that site. Before going there, I said, why not use the radio equipment that I have, right? This space communication station that I'm using for moonbound communication. Why not sending an invitation message, before going to the site? So I found a way. I found a way to encode essentially an invitation message which contained the date, time, and the geographical coordinates, right? The latitude and longitude where I intended to be on May 1st, 2017. And I blasted this throughout the solar system with my radio station prior to going to the site. And again, the signal, when the typical moonbound communication, like my station is pretty powerful. I mean, it's more powerful than any of the commercial radio station you're going to listen to on your AM or FM radio. Typically, these big guns, if you look at KFI in Los Angeles, they broadcast about with 50,000 watts of power, and it's known to be like the big guns, the very powerful station. The power we're talking about here in terms of effective isotropic radiated power for my station is close to 250,000 watts on 432 megahertz.
Whoa.
That's
And,
5 times, right?
Yeah.
It's also directional, so directed to the target. So when I make these transmissions, let's say towards Jupiter or towards Saturn, towards the moon or towards the sun, the radio wave will physically reach these targets, So if there's ETs out there, and that was my assumption at the time, I said, I'm going to broadcast an invitation message. I say, if there's any, extraterrestrial civilizations out there, or, monitoring planet Earth or whatever, they should be able to pick up the signal, right? It's like delivering a message literally to their doorstep. So I did that, but to be honest with you, I had absolutely zero expectations of anything happening. Okay, so I did it because, you know, why not? And so I made these transmissions a couple of days prior, in the days prior to going to the site. I broadcasted this message. And then came the day of, you know, what I call my day of first contact. So I ended up driving to that location. I was alone. Again, I was just going there to screen and scout the site for future contact work. And I had with me a small, you know, a handheld radio, which I've kind of have here, this, you know, this kind of small radio that I had also tuned to the same frequency that I had broadcasted the message with my large radio station. So I had that with me, and I went to the site. Was very pleased by the site. It was beautiful, close to a lake, far from interferences, far from civilization, and no light pollution. So that was perfect. So I stayed there, you know, maybe after 20 minutes, I stayed there and then said, okay, I'm just gonna, before leaving, just gonna relax a bit before going back home. So I took my handheld radio and I put it on the rooftop of my car, and I sat down on a chair and just closed my eyes and just started relaxing and meditating a bit and just, you know, enjoy the place where I was. And minutes after that, my radio started interacting, started like flashing and behaving in a way that I had never seen before. And again, I have been an amateur radio operator all my life. I know the technology very well. I know what interferences are. I know what can cause interference. I know how radio behaves when there's an interference of some sort that will, you know, that can trigger a radio. But here I was in the middle of nowhere in Los Padres National Park at night with no cell signals around because it was so far away. There was not even a cell tower reaching that location. You know what was going on here, right? So the signal was just, the radio was going crazy. But to be honest with you, and that may sound crazy, at the time of that, when that happened, I didn't make the connection because I was so not expecting anything to happen that I didn't even make the connection that this may be some kind of reply or some kind of interaction, you know, as a result of the invitation message that I sent. I found actually it annoying because here I was trying to relax and this radio was going crazy. So anyway, after a while, I decided to go back home. So I packed everything back up, got back in my car and went back home. But I was very intrigued by it. It was very strange. You know, there was nothing that could explain that. So in the following days, while I was in the city where I was living, I decided to keep the radio with me. I clipped it on my belt. And I said, if there's any kind of, you know, signal or interference or behavior that, you know, this radio is dying or something, it should happen while I'm in town, right? While I'm close to Wi-Fi signal interferences in the city, right? That's where that could be more happening. So I did that, and during that period, nothing happened. Radio was completely silent, right? There's a squelch, there's an automatic silencer on these radios, as you know, FM radios, and nothing happened. The radio was completely silent. So that was even more stranger. I even tried to replicate this interaction with my large radio station. I was broadcasting, you know, blasting very powerful signal with my large radio station and keeping my small handheld radio close by and see if this will trigger it, and nothing happened. So I wasn't able to replicate anything that makes sense. So I didn't have an explanation. Anyway, 2 weeks later, I went back to the site. I was with a friend this time. So I went back to that site and I repeated the protocol. So in the days prior, I broadcasted an invitation message with, with coordinates, time and date. I drove to the site, and then minutes after arriving, the same thing happened again. The radio starting behaving exactly the same way that it had behaved on my day of first contact. Then I started saying, I would say, holy cow, right? There's something going on here. And I was with somebody, and it was clear that we were kind of asking questions, and it felt like there was an intelligence driving this interaction as well. It was just not random. It was very modulated, precisely modulated, very strange. And we started connecting the dots. There was something, you know, clearly that was going on here. And, you know, shortly after, and that's how my story started, shortly after I started having sightings in the sky, and you know, all kind of high strangeness. So I purchased a nitrogen camera, at the time a Luna Optics nitrogen camera. So I was able to record these interactions and record these sightings that I've had. And I kept doing this, essentially. I kept repeating this protocol for months. And typically I was alone. I ended up doing this contact work alone. With a group, it was a bit complicated. People don't show up and, you know, all that. So I didn't have time to manage that. So I ended up just doing this as a personal experience, really. and going to this contact site by myself, 95% of the time, and have had an incredible experience. And that's how my story started, really. And so I don't know if you have questions. I can continue here, but this is how it started.
So did you see any lights or had any manifestations like in the sky when you were listening to these radio broadcasts or whatever it was that was coming through your radio?
Oh yeah, I mean, there was I dissociate the radio interactions themselves. Radio interactions were not always accompanied by sightings in the skies necessarily, but when I was doing contact work, I always had some kind of sightings or experience. I mean, 100% of the time, there's not a single time that there was nothing happening, right? So the radio always religiously interacted while I was on the site. And I had sightings, and I mean, I've had all kind of experiences. I mean, it's it's been an incredible journey, really. But I remember one time, for instance, I was just standing up, and in front of my car, and the entire forest right in front of me lit up, like as if there was a huge light, coming from the sky, shining over all the forest right in front of me. So a lot of very high strangeness and things like that. And then really I realized actually then that I didn't need to go to that contact site anymore to have interactions. I could do it from my backyard, right? So I could have the same experiences from my backyard because I had my large radio station there as well and everything, right? So I was making transmissions and just going at night in the backyard and with my night vision camera, and had experiences. And so from there it really snowballed, and that's how that's how it happened. And then I shared this, obviously I shared this with other experiencers in the field, what I was experiencing with the radios and so on. I mean, the use of radio to communicate or to interact is not totally new. I mean, there's some folks in the, called a CE-5 that use radio sometimes, and they can transmit, they have tones, they transmit tones, but it's not widely known. It's not very developed, right? It's not very developed. So I shared my protocol, if you will, with experiencers from all over the world. I mean, there's a community out there, fantastic community, experiencers that make contact, and I shared the protocol with them. Folks acquired radios, and I started having a report that they were getting the same interactions from everywhere in the world, from New Zealand, Australia, in Japan. There are very active teams in Japan, from everywhere, really. And I mean, there's a small community that started, gluing together and built up from there. And it was incredible. People were sharing their sightings, their experiences, and it became part, essentially, of the contact work we were doing. I mean, for me, obviously, it's more personal because I'm very deeply into this, and I have this large radio station. But it's been utilized now by a lot of folks around the world. So it's not only me; it's been successfully utilized from people around the world. Now, people out there may say, well, it's not possible. How can this be possible, right? I mean, does it make sense? I should probably clarify the physics behind this a little bit. Why is it possible to use this as a contact modality? First of all, and people don't know that, and this may have been, by the way, purposely hidden or suppressed from the population for a long time. But when you use it, literally like a small handheld radio that I showed earlier with 4 to 8 watts, and you transmit with that, the radio signal that you transmit will literally reach the moon, will go far deep in space, and will reach the moon and go beyond. People don't know that. If you look, for instance, the communication satellites that are, passing above our heads every second, there are thousands of them in the lower Earth orbit. These satellites transmit with a power of a few milliwatts, typically 500 milliwatts, 250 milliwatts. I mean, it's a very small power. It's a fraction of a watt, typically. And they will, since there's no obstacle, they're in space, this signal, this power is sufficient for us to hear, and the satellite guides all the GPS communication, all the stuff that's happening on Earth, right? With very, very small power. Actually, if you buy one of these handheld radios and you set the ISS, or the International Space Station frequency, you're going to hear the International Space Station when it flies over your head. If you're tuned to that frequency, there's some transmission made by this space station, and you can hear it. And that, again, the ISS is using a few milliwatts, not even in the watts. So it doesn't take a lot of power to get your voice heard in space. Back in 2014, there was a probe, a Chinese probe that was sent to the moon and back. And that Chinese probe was equipped with a small radio transmitter of only 1 watt with a small vertical antenna. And throughout its journey, this probe was transmitting telemetry. And the amateur radio community on the Earth could detect and decode these signals. While again, this probe reached the moon and was just using 1 watt, right? So that's the demonstration. That's the proof that with a small amount of power, you can get your voice heard in space. So based on that, just if you look at the physics of it, and we know now, I mean, even the government has been suppressing this reality of UAP or UFOs and ETs for decades now, with the Tic Tac videos and the Nimitz and all these things, right? It's known that these objects and these intelligence are in our atmosphere. They are not far. They are right here above our head. Okay. Yeah. So if you connect the dots now, we have the way to get our voice heard in space. And these civilizations with very advanced technologies are in our atmosphere or in the, in our vicinity of our planet monitoring us. It makes sense that if you transmit something that's directed to them, that they may pick it up. Now, with AI, with artificial intelligence, and even even the NSA has this technology. I mean, in space, they can pick any signal and decode exactly where it's coming from and what it is, and then decode it. I mean, we can just imagine a civilization that is 1 million years in advance of us technologically. It makes sense to think that they have very sophisticated AI, and every signal that is emanating from planet Earth is being detected, decoded, analyzed, and they act upon the signal if it is appropriate for them to do so. It just makes sense, right? So if we look at the overall context of it, the whole picture, technologically, in terms of physics and in terms of that's out there and AI, it makes complete sense that if you make a transmission with a radio, you transmit radio waves that are directed at these civilizations, that you may get a reply or you may get some kind of interaction back. And so I just wanted to clarify that there's nothing esoteric about it. It's completely explainable by the science technology that we have today.
And on the note that you said, we're very loud and proud. It sounds like, when you look at Earth on the dark side at night, it's all lit up like it's Las Vegas, right? So on the light spectrum, they can see we're here. If they have radio, obviously they do. They would detect that. We are very loud. There's plenty of stuff out there for them to listen to. And even now we're looking at the Hubble telescope that recently discovered like 6 galaxies that they never thought could possibly exist. And it proved that, yes, they do. And as we're getting better technology, we're able to zoom in on planets, and eventually we'll be able to figure out there's a civilization there because it will be lit up the same way as ours. We'll get radio signals from that location. So it's fascinating that you're doing that work, because that seems to be maybe something that we will be looking for when we're looking for life out there.
Absolutely. It's a natural extension of an intelligent civilization was exploring, what's out there. It makes complete sense. And even today, on the Earth, the technologies out there that if there's any signal, I mean, there are satellites right now, and you can find this information on the net. It's not, it's really public. There's, spy satellites and things like that have the ability that anytime that there's a radio signal being emitted from the Earth, they can locate exactly pinpoint where the signal is coming from a geographical standpoint. So based on that, it makes sense that, if you broadcast something that is dedicated or directed to them, that you may get a reply back or some kind of interactions and experience. And the other thing that I noticed also, I should mention, is that I studied these interactions that were happening on my radios, because I ended up buying actually more than one radio. I have 10 probably now radios. And amazingly, these intelligence were able to trigger these radios individually differently. So, of course, if you tune all the radio to the same frequency, and again, I had tuned up all these radio to the same frequency, but even if you tune radios to the same frequency, or they receive regular radio waves, all the radios should be doing the same thing, right? If you listen to a FM radio station, you tune 3 radios to the same frequency, you're going to hear the same radio station. The work that I was doing and what we learned is that this is not what was happening in this context. When there's interaction with the electronic equipment and the radios, the intelligence is able to control individually each radio, and they behave completely differently, even if they are set to the same frequency, which completely breaks the laws of physics. And the other thing is realize that, if you even if you shield the radio, you put it in a Faraday cage, for instance, to shield it from any radio wave to go in or out, they are still able to trigger these radios and interact with them, regardless of the location, regardless of even sometimes you can take off the antenna and it's still going to interact. So quickly I realized that these interactions or the energy that were triggering these interactions were not following the laws of physics as we know them. It's some other form of energy that we don't know, but clearly behaves completely differently. And from there, I mean, there can be a lot of different purposes to this energy, and so we can only speculate about it, obviously, but one can imagine that if it's actually an energy that's being funneled for the radio that's triggering it, as opposed to regular wave, that energy may contain information itself, right? They may be encoding information in DNA. They may be, they may be doing all kind of things, right? That we don't understand and we don't know at this point. And so that was an aspect that was very fascinating to me.
You sent us a documentary that you made, and I found it fascinating. And we'll tell people where they can find it, obviously, at the end of the show. But I love the fact that you guys graduated to a point where you weren't just broadcasting Morse code or something random. You were digitizing pictures, like your face, a picture of a UFO craft, and a heartfelt message. If it is safe and appropriate, we request your visitation. And part of me in my mind always thinks, like Stephen Hawking said, you shouldn't mess around communicating with things you don't know what they are. But if you look at the CE-5 movement, it's all about loving communications, loving meditations, acceptance, forgiveness. So if with that being your kind of manifestation, it would make sense that's what you would attract. But in your documentary, you basically take a picture, convert it into radio waves, and you broadcast that message. And the sheer amount of UAPs that you caught on camera, we're not talking grainy, shaky. I mean, these are on tripod, clear as day, in the middle of the day, sitting there for like 2 hours in some cases. Very peaceful, very loving. And even like, as you mentioned, these radios are interacting all differently. It's almost like they had a Morse code pattern. It was a repetitive pattern on one, another one may have a different sound. Like they were literally all speaking different languages. And it kind of reminded me of like what ghost hunters do. They set up all this EMF equipment, tri-field meters to just try to measure this type of thing. And so what are your thoughts on that? Like, is this all connected? Is it the same type of thing that ghost hunters are doing and putting out a petition and then getting a response?
I mean, there are many connections, obviously, that I'm sure there are many connections in terms of the energies that are driving these type of interactions. And what you mentioned, I mean, is exactly right. I mean, the technique I use evolved over time, and I started being able to encode, as you mentioned, pictures. I broadcasted even like an entire symphony, like accelerated within a few seconds, but symphony pictures with messages of peace and for contact. And of course, I always encourage the folks out there to take the proper precaution. It's just like here on the earth, right? If you go in town at night in a very shaky neighborhood, right, bad things can happen, right? So you need to act smartly and be mindful of where you go, how you do things. Similarly, when you do this contact work, you need to make sure you take the proper precaution, and you invite only benevolent civilizations, and make sure that you protect yourself from that standpoint. And we have to be aware of that, obviously. But from my personal experience, I can tell you, and from all the folks that I've been interacting with over the years, I never heard one negative experience that somebody said I had a very bad experience and it was traumatizing and blah blah blah. I've never heard anything of that, and it's been my own experience. It's been only positive experience. And so we should not be driven by fear, really, when we do this work. That is not to say that there are no malevolent civilizations out there. I'm not stating that. Okay, so clearly there are polarities in the universe. There's good and bad, but if people take the proper precaution, they should stay in that space of of positivity, if you will. And yeah, it's been amazing. I've had an amazing amount of interactions throughout my experience now since 2017, hundreds of them literally. If the folks are interested, they can look on my on YouTube channel called Human Initiated Contact, and you're going to see a lot of sightings and videos at nighttime, daytimes, and so on. My documentaries there as well, showing other teams also. And one of the things I started doing was to broadcast messages on behalf of other contact teams, right? So there are contact teams all over the world, and I'm still doing it today. I mean, I'm still receiving. I received a request a few days ago from a team in Japan, and they say, "Hey, we're going to have a contact event coming up on that date." They send me the information, and I broadcast message for them on their behalf, and so just to help the folks out there. So something I've always been happy to do. Again, I'm not making money with this. I'm not selling anything. It's just really for the betterment of humanity that I'm doing this. And yeah, it's been amazing. And as you said, just to answer quickly your question more precisely, the energies that all seems to be at play here, which current science is either ignoring or just suppressing from us, clearly seems to be not bounded by space-time. And I think these interactions for the radios is just a testament of that they are replying with their technology, right? We transmit and we send an intention for contact to them using our technology, if you will, and they reply back using their technology, which makes sense, which we don't understand yet, but it's probably all connected, and through my work, and we can discuss that a bit later, I'm starting to tap into better understand what's behind all this. And there's really a fascinating thing from a technological standpoint that opens the door to a lot of different things. And I think we as a civilizations, as we move along and increase this level of contact, we're going to learn more and more what's really behind this. And the level of contact, frequency, and intensity, I think, will just keep increasing dramatically in the coming months and years.
It's interesting because the more that we talk to people, the more we understand that it's not just the science of these crafts, which is the nuts and bolts, which is something that, Louis is very strong on. I'm more on the consciousness aspect of things and the experiencer side of things. I think that's why we have such a good combo. But it's, when I listened or read the book from Bob Lazar, Dreamland, and he explained there's a moment where they had the craft outside and the craft was activated. It seemed to be working on some sort of gravitational field that it generates around itself. It should not be able to pick up or receive radio signals because of that gravitational field. But he said somehow it was able to do that. It did, the laws of physics didn't seem to apply to this craft or this technology. And again, this stuff is flown or seems to be conscious. Like these crafts are. The craft itself is conscious. So whoever is manipulating these crafts or flying these crafts extend their consciousness to the entire thing. And that seems to be something that we were seeing as a pattern on the show, is that consciousness has a huge role to play. And I find it interesting that you can make contact the way that you're doing it with radio signals, or by some people are saying that CE-5 works. So it seems to be the either or. We can make contact with these things and they tend to show up.
Absolutely. I mean, I have not spoken much about it since the beginning of the interview, but there's a massive connection to consciousness in this work. I mean, the essence of CE-5 per se, or human initiated contact, many will initiate and we have contact just purely with sending an intent, right, through consciousness. Mm-hmm. That's well known. It's well documented. That's the foundation, actually, of the CE-5 protocol per se. There are many different modalities, really. There are really different modalities. So the way I'm looking at it, when I started using the radio, was more as a technological aid, a help, right? Technological aid to, to facilitate this contact. It's like, to me, it's like, nudging on their shoulder, right? So say, hey, I'm here, I'm willing to make contact, right? I'm using this technology, but once it's done, when the connection is established, it becomes really more a consciousness thing. And that's an important part of it. For all the reports we have from experiencers who've had close contact with, the intelligence, their ships, as you mentioned, actually are driven through consciousness. They're not like, with like a wheels or anything like that, right? So they are really driven and controlled through the consciousness of the person or the entity was, kind of driving the ships. And that's what we hear. And most of them actually are not even metallic. It's like they're grown, they are kind of a mixture of biological technology with things we don't really understand, but they are not the way we think that this metallic object that we that are hard, right? This metal and aluminum thing type of things. There's some part of it, but it's really also connected to biology and DNA of the operators themselves. Right. So it can go pretty far, and it's not a one thing. It's not a one size fits all, because there are different intelligence out there that have their level of technological advance is different from one civilization to the other. So there's all kind of technology out there depending on a civilization and intelligence that you might be interacting with. So we cannot all put all that in the same bowl, if you will, but there's a lot of variety out there. But from my perspective, again, I've been using this contact modality with the radios and invitation and all that as a technological aid. But very quickly, once you start making contact, it becomes a very personal thing, and it's connected to consciousness. And depending on what you're looking for, what you are attempting to do, and your own connections and your level of awakening, if you will, you're going to have different experience depending on what you're going to have experience that are suitable to you, to your own person. And it's varied, obviously, from one experiencer to the others. So it's again, not one size fits all, but it's quite fascinating. And again, completely connected to consciousness. And I want to demystify this question of consciousness, because, and it's part of the work that my work led to this, is that we realized that this aspect that was more esoteric, or all these things, are actually not, and there's a science behind this. And if we look at the frequency of brain waves is operating, the Schumann resonance of the Earth, there are connections there. These are these harmonic connections that are out there that connects all these things together. Things are much more simple and unified than we've been led to believe. And what we thought or assumed to be impossible, communicate to telepathy, for instance, and things like that, well, there are mechanisms that can be completely explained by our current physics as to why this is happening. And so there's nothing woo-woo out there. This is math, this is science, and this is technology, and this is how things works.
Now, this is basically one of a two-part series we're going to do, because another huge aspect of what you do is the mathematics of understanding things, finding patterns, and kind of simplifying everything. So I watched the presentation you gave where you talk about the golden ratio. I mean, this is something that people like Pythagoras and Leonardo da Vinci, and it goes years back. And we've all seen the picture of like the man with the arm standing out and then the arms over his head. Essentially, they're trying to give you the ratio of 1 to 1.6. So like your head to your belly button and your belly button to your feet, that's 1 to 1.6. Your arm to your elbow to your fingertip. Even in the pupils of your eyes, your heart rhythm, your brain waves, the height of your front teeth to the teeth beside them, the spirals of a hurricane, the way a sunflower is created. There's this magical math, and a lot of people have looked at this over the years, but you've taken a real deep dive on this, and you've basically found a few constants and a few basic mathematical values. So you've got 144, you have the golden ratio, and you have the number 432.
Yep.
And you've done calculations on the Great Pyramid of Giza, even some craft footage itself, and they seem to be flashing and appearing in the same mathematical harmonic. And you've basically gone and said, okay, well, regular physics and quantum physics don't seem to agree. Maybe they're just using the wrong qubit, so to speak. Maybe their metric number or whatever you're using to calculate is just slightly off. Could there be a more simplified way of doing it? So we're going to dedicate a whole episode to that, but I wanted you to briefly just talk about what is it, in fact, how did you start to find these patterns? And like now you've basically come up with a formula that matches everything physics has found, like the mass of the universe, the energy in the universe. But instead of it being 52 chalkboards long, it's like 4 characters. It's very simple. And the accuracy is like over 99% perfect match almost every single time. So you're the expert on this. I'll let you go.
Thank you. You made a great summary, Louise. So yeah, through my experience, it became clear that the intelligence was communicating to us this information, and it has been communicating to us this information for probably thousands of years, through various ways. I mean, if you just look at the ancient sacred sites located around the world, I mean, the Great Pyramid of Giza is one of them, but there's a ton of other megalithic structures, entrance sacred sites. If you look at the Easter Island, if you look at the Machu Picchu, if you look at the pyramids located all over the world, there's something going on here, right? And through my work, I found that all these things were connected, and this knowledge of these geometric harmonics that I call, which are fractalized through the golden ratio principle that you talked about, actually is a different perspective on our physics, but actually explains absolutely everything. It's like unifies everything in very simple formulas, in that everything in our holographic universe really can be reduced to these fundamental harmonic of light, this harmonic 144 and the golden ratio. I mean, that's what it is. And which makes sense if you think about it. We think about the Big Bang, right? Whatever you believe in the Big Bang or not, this, what's at the source of creation in the universe is really this light energy that was this initial spark of light energy. And that light energy then was converted into matter and material, right? Became the material world and all that. But all that happened through the golden ratio principle. As you mentioned, the golden ratio principle is everywhere in nature. We find it everywhere, and you made a good description of it. And so it's very simple. The source energy, what I call a source creation, really emanates from that. And that is I truly believe that is the real physics, actually, and probably the physics that's been hidden from us, has been suppressed. But clearly, that information has been encoded in all these ancient sacred sites, and the Pyramid of Giza is probably the top, the summit of it, where that information is encoded. I did my own analysis of the Great Pyramid. We see these connections. I mean, the math is undeniable. The math is accurate. It's typically in the 99.9% accuracy or higher accuracy. And when we start looking at the world around us, we realize that the world, what we perceive or we see as the physical world is connected to this, is completely explainable to this, from, again, our brainwaves frequencies, to the Schumann resonance, to our DNA, the DNA molecule. And some of the work I'm doing now, I'm digging into the actual DNA molecule and how it resonates with these harmonics. Even the nucleic acids that makes up of DNA, when you convert these molecules into energy, they resonate with these frequencies as well. It's unbelievable. So everything is connected to this. And actually everything connected to this connects to the consciousness field. I mean, that's where we can establish that connection. So, and we see, you had a great guest a few days ago about the Rendlesham forest, for instance. And I've been in touch with, Gary Osborne, who's the co-author of the Rendlesham Enigma, and strongly suggest for you guys to have probably him on the show. He has amazing information. And, through that's an example, this whole story about the Rendlesham, if you know the story, right? The gentleman, Jim Peniston, when he came close to the craft and landed his hands on the craft, got a download of binary code messages, dozens of pages of binary code message, which he wrote in a little notebook. And only 30 years later, they got this binary code decoded. And that information was communicated to my good friend Gary Osborne, and he started decoding this information, what was behind it. And essentially part of this message, and we can talk about more maybe in the next episode, but part of this message was really, this message contained 7 geographical locations located around the Earth. Like the Sedona was one of them, literally the coordinates, right? The binary code contained latitude and longitude coordinates. There were 7 sites that were identified. The Great Pyramid of Giza was one of them. You got High Brazil, which is believed to be an old civilization or buried civilization under the sea and on the west coast of Ireland. There's the Temple of Apollo, Mount Titian in China, the Nazca lines, the Nazca plains that you in South America, and a pyramid also in Central America. So anyway, there's 7 locations, and the math that's contained, the information that's contained in these 7 locations is absolutely fascinating. I mean, Gary, for instance, and again, you should have him on the show. He found that that information contained the fine structure constants at many decimals of accuracy, and an insane level of accuracy that actually we only were able to discover recently, right? So it's as if they knew that we will we'll get to that knowledge at some point in time, and that message, that the Rendlesham contained that information. I did my own analysis of the binary code of this Rendlesham Enigma binary code, and I found amazing things, and that's where, again, disconnected to my work that I was already doing about these harmonics, about the Earth grid, which is also tuned to these harmonics. And we find, for instance, even some of these sightings, like the Nimitz incident, that I do have a slide about it, shows that the location on the, that sighting occurred on the coast of Catalina Island. And if you calculate the geometric harmonic distance between that, where this craft showed up, and the Great Pyramid, you get a perfect harmonic 144 whole number of it, right? It's very precise. And these sites, these ancient sacred sites, which encodes its knowledge themselves, where they are built on the planet Earth, when you make this calculation on the Earth grid, we realized it's all connected to this mathematic, this very simple mathematic that explains the Earth grids and explain how things works. And I've had my own sightings, incredible sightings of like a triangular craft, for instance, which I call the golden ratio triangular craft, which encoded this information, encodes the golden ratio, encodes this harmonic 144, and encodes this harmonic 432, which is just stunning. The math is so precise, it's just undeniable. There's just no way that all this is just an accident. It just works out so beautifully. Interestingly, the two frequency that I have been broadcasting on since 2017 is 144.1 megahertz and 432 megahertz. So these harmonics just happens to be the frequency that I've been broadcasting on. The 144, when I started with this one, was a complete coincidence, because I was this is a frequency that's in the band, or the frequency band that is used for moon-bound communications. I had picked the frequency that was, that of course allowed to broadcast on, but is in that range, and I ended up using this frequency. Call it, accident or coincidence. And now I realize today that this frequency is massively important and has strong connection to all this mathematics, which we can get more into next episode. But it's fascinating, and we see there's really clearly a very clear connections between all these sites, the sightings, and I think, from my perspective, what I realize, I think, is that the intelligence has been putting this information in front of us for thousands of years, and just waiting for us to reach that level of awareness and technology where we recognize this information, and we can essentially decode it and create a new physics of it, with it, a new perspective on physics that's no longer bounded or limited by false concepts or division, because our science is very divided. And it all brings everything together, and it just happens to be that the intelligence, the basis of their technology, is based on that. And when I look at the golden ratio triangular craft, for instance, that I have manifested near my antenna 4 times already, which I have on videos, I have all the records of it. I have all that on my YouTube channel. That information, to me, that craft alone, which this harmonic 144, 432 golden ratio, is probably what they base their technology on, and that's how they can pop in and out of a dimension, or manifest instantly from one side of the universe to the other instantly, because their crafts are in tune with these harmonics of creation, literally.
Yeah, I like how you use the formula, and I think it was 1 equals 144 times the golden ratio times 432. Yes. But essentially, you're proposing a simple mathematical equation that explains the consciousness field, and you're the only person I've ever heard that said, from the light of the Big Bang, that is where matter came from, right from the protons and neutrons, and they all fit these same harmonics as well. But whether you believe in God or source, or you're a total atheist, there are mathematics, simplified mathematics, that the average person can get after they listen to it once or twice, not like you need a degree. But using these simplified terms, we can literally amalgamate religion and science, because this is an explanation that makes them all possible. There is no separation. And again, we'll get into this at a later date, but I think you're the only, I thought you were a mathematician, but then when I heard you talking about UFOs and how you kind of made it enjoyable and understandable, I realized you can't be a mathematician, because I wouldn't be able to understand a damn thing you said. But you have the brain for that, and you're putting it in a digestible way. And you draw the conclusion that it's not just, craft, it's physical ley lines. Like this whole idea is like ley lines on steroids, even from like the Prime Meridian to the Pyramid of Giza to Rendlesham Forest. It's the exact 1 to 1.6, the Orion's belt, where things are kind of slightly askew, even with the building of the pyramid. There's a reason for all that. It's not just accidental. And as you said, maybe this was just crumbs dropped thousands of years ago. We're finally getting smart enough to figure this out. And, you know, maybe within the scientific world, there's some pride. Somebody comes up with a new formula that explains things. They don't want to let that go per se. So there's a lot of guys holding on to old calculations and saying, well, this can't be. And I love how you just kind of threw that away and said, let's just look at what the planet is already telling us. What do we know?
I was going to say science has become almost a religion, you know, like they'll adhere to something and they say, you cannot go beyond this. It's, you know, it's nonsense. I remember John Mack when, you know, he's a professor at Harvard, for crying out loud. He investigated people that had abduction cases and stuff like that. And then just everybody freaked out. Like, how could you possibly venture into this field? And now we're getting more scientists, some, like, you know, people like yourself, Jimmy, that are coming forward and saying, you know, why don't I use the knowledge that I have and the ability that I have to try to help solve this problem? Are we alone? Are we getting visitation? I think, you know, more and more women and men of science are coming forward and saying, you know, we need to step up to the plate and stop looking at this as if it's an issue, a taboo issue, and look at it from a scientific point of view. Let's collect the data and see what the data says. At the end of the day, it's always about the data and what you capture. I had one final question for you, Jimmy, on my part. We seem to see a lot of orbs in the skies, and they're always three. They always come in 3 or 4, but 3 seems to be the more common one. Do you think there's a purpose behind that? Like, is there a math purpose behind that, or does that still kind of fall within your theory?
Well, 3 is a Fibonacci number, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, there is. I think there is a purpose behind everything we see, right? We're being exposed to certain high strangeness, you know, depending on what it is, obviously, what we see. I think there's a purpose to it. I've not studied this one specifically, but my bet would be that there's a message or something behind this that needs to be, you know, looked at. You know, as a general thing, what you mentioned, I both very much agree with everything you both said. You know, we need to stop as a humanity to stop looking up at the higher authority to tell us what reality is. That needs to stop. Right, we know that we've not gotten the truth from the government on the UFO things for decades. So many things have been suppressed, and you know, it's in every field, even in science. I mean, every time actually there's been a real discovery in science, it's somebody that broke the glass and it just went beyond the, you know, the little box that current science is trying to put around them. Right, we need to stop looking up at the higher authorities to tell us what to believe and what reality is. We all have this ability, each one of us, to have our own experience. That's what I'm doing. The work I've been doing and many others is available to any one of us. Any one of us. We can do it, and we need to take things into our hands. And I think that's what's slowly percolating right now. That's what's happening. We've got regular people like me and you and I, you know, experiencers, and we are starting to connect the dots. It's unstoppable. And I think that the great awakening of humanity, that's what it is all about. I think the civilizations have been putting this information in front of us. They don't have the right to interfere directly. We know that, otherwise they will have landed to the White House long time ago, right? But they are not interfering. That's a basic law of the universe, the law of non-interference. But what they can do is to make the information right there. And so when we can recognize that information and we can turn that into technologies that will free humanity, this knowledge, this different perspective on physics really has the power to free human civilization from its current dependencies and limitations and so on. We can have free energy and so on, and that's what's happening right now. I think this is the big shift that's happening. You know, there's a reason why Nikola Tesla was building his tower to harness free energy from a very specific location, right? He had built his tower at a very specific location to harness that free energy from the Earth grid. His calculations, I mean, all this, I think he had found this information, or some of it at the time, and he had found a way to start building technologies around this. This is accessible. This is, you know, that's what's in front of us right now, and I think it's going to accelerate from there. And I'm glad you guys are sharing the message. You know, it's I think that's where we're at as a civilization, and contact is becoming more frequent, more intense now. And talk about what's been encoded. Also, one thing I found really fascinating. You know, if you look even at the Great Pyramid of Giza and the cubit, for instance, right? The Royal Egyptian cubit, as you know, is the measurement unit that was used supposedly to build the pyramid, right? All the math is based on that. My own analysis of the cubit, this measurement unit itself, is actually completely connected to the quantum world. The qubit length is actually a fractal of the quantum world. If you take the Planck length, essentially, the qubit, the length of qubit is 2 times the Planck length times the golden ratio. That's what it is. So it is a fractal from the quantum field. So it's fascinating. So that information, even for these sites and the sightings we're getting, again, encodes quantum physics itself, or different perspective on quantum physics. So I think this is just the beginning. As we connect more and more the dots, we're going to learn more. But now, having looked at it with that perspective, everywhere I look around myself, everything I look at is connected to this, because it kind of makes sense, right? If there's one source creation, the code of the reality of this holographic universe we live in that is so simple, explains everything. When we look at it, when we look at everything around us with that perspective, we realize that everything is connected to this and connected to the consciousness field, as you mentioned. There's no separation there.
The cool thing about quantum physics is it's the search for smaller and smaller and smaller until there is no more smaller, i.e. the Planck scale, right? Or the Planck length. But that works at the micro level as well as the macro level. The whole universe works exactly the same way. If it works at this tiny little specimen through a microscope, and then, onwards and onwards down, it also must work in everything else. People have studied water, and you give water an intention, and when you freeze it, the crystal looks different. Water that's been given the intention of love, it has an amazing crystal. Water that's been given the intention of hate is like black and devoid of shape. So we're, 80% water or whatever that is. We are we are transmitters and receivers. We have a resonance. And if we are all entangled from the Big Bang, that resonance is literally in everything. It can be measured, it can be replicated, it can be studied. So I like the fact that you're throwing away some of the old guard. And I know, we said this at the end of our season last year. We said, what's going to happen in 2023? Our focus was to get more of a scientific approach. We don't believe it's going to come from the government. What's in the next UFO Congress paper? Who cares? It's not going to be anything that's of any value to us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So let's give our attention to people like Jimmy, like others who are thinking outside the box, presenting their findings for the world, not making money off of it, saying, hey, this is what I've done. It worked for me. You should try it out. So kudos to you for doing that and being brave. And again, there is taboo around this subject. You work in a professional world. You have a reputation to uphold, but thank you for not being scared, and for doing what you did and putting it in such a digestible way. So we will have another episode. Maybe we will have you do some slides. I know we're not big on slides, but I watched your presentation. It's mind-blowing, and it makes it a lot easier to digest when you have the visual and you dissect great pyramids of Giza, different things on the planet, even craft themselves and the lights, or the way that they've decided to appear and manifest, the codes within all of this stuff. And it literally blew my mind, and that's hard to do. So kudos to you on that. We are going to have you back. But before we go, one more time, where can people find you?
Yes, thank you so much, Luis. I have my YouTube channel. It's called Human Initiated Contact. If you just put that in Google and you search, it should show up. You'll see my picture within the first, few hits. From there, you will find many videos. I mean, from the beginning of my work in 2017, I documented what I was seeing in the sky and so on. And some interviews are out there. It's all free. It's accessible, so you can see for yourself what we're talking about, the kind of manifestation that are happening. And again, there's a wonderful community out there of experiencers. Again, it's not only me doing this work. There's a wonderful community of experiencers. I encourage everyone to try it, get informed, get information. If you want to go in the field and try it, they'll contact teams probably close to your location. And again, it's accessible to every one of us. I think that's part of the great awakening that's happening right now, and it's very exciting. I'm very excited about the future, and I thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to give that information out there to the public. It's great. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, and we look forward to having you back again soon. We'll do part 2 of this, and we'll dive into those geometric harmonics that you've been speaking about. If you're a math or physics lover, it's an episode you're not going to want to miss. So. But for today, that's all the time we got. We want to extend a very warm thanks to Mr. Jimmy Blanchette. You blew our minds, and I'm sure many of our viewers. Yeah. And thanks for making it digestible for our audience. We appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Take care.